Alright, welcome to the podcast. And here we go.
Hey everyone, welcome to the first installment of our podcast. It's Daniel, Kyle and Ron, and today we're going to be talking about the post-mortem of our first studio production, the Nerve Endings project, game music. We're basically just going to be going through the ins and outs of it and sort of discussing how it went and our processes during the creation of it.
Yeah, so originally we all had kind of our own idea of like a Doom kind of inspired track, like super heavy in your face, getting you really hyped up and stuff. So we all came together and made this scratch track, and we showed it to everyone. And
yeah, it went pretty well. I remember when we presented it to Nick and I think it was Pete that was there. We got pretty good feedback, and it was in its basic form. And on that same day, we built upon it, and we added a lot of what was it again? It was like some weird spacious choir or something like that.
Yeah. I think that's where the track was starting to become a bit more experimental at that point. We started to move outside of what our original scope was. Like Kyle said, we really, when the project was sort of conceived, we came together with the idea that it was going to be some sort of really sort of intense track, but as we started to add more elements, like Ron said with the spacious choir, we started to shift our focus, and it started to become more of an epic, more of an orchestral sort of massive scale sounding project, not so in your face like we originally planned.
Also, didn't we have we started off with your guitar?
Yeah, that's something that we started off with first as well. During the writing process, we started off using the guitars as the basis, but we found that it was too guitar intensive. It started to sound too much like a song and not like something you'd hear in the background of a game.
so from that, instead of using the guitars as the basis, we ended up using a drum loop that I created by just randomly messing around with a synth, and I set the preset to kick drums, so every single sound was a different kick sample, and ended up making like this weird phasey loop of kicks that like really fit like the dark percussive kind of thing.
And I remember when you came in, it wasn't just some standard sort of 4/4 typical game thing. It really had a lot of movement and groove to it, and that's what made it so. It sounds energetic, and it sounds like the type of thing that gets you hyped for a game, and that's why it was so much better to build off that than the guitars.
Plus the guitar, we didn't even know what key it was in. We couldn't even add
any
melodies.
That was the problem. So as we kind of moved towards that vision more, we started to focus more on the creative process, and I think the three main elements that really comprise the track are the drums, guitar, and the choirs. They're really the backbone, and everything else is sort of just extra.
I know we made different drum loops where, even though we got like my original drum loop, we like broke it down in sections, so it was like a basic version for like breakdowns, like ambience and shit, and then we'd bring it back up and make it super epic, and then we'd add in the other elements as well.
Yeah, just to give the track a bit of dynamic, so it's not constantly, because that one drum loop was really good, but having it there all the time throughout the entire track was starting to detract from the impact that it had. So
really made it repetitive and
minor variations, but nothing too crazy, so that it felt like it was a song. Because when songs go from like a bridge to like a pre-chorus to a chorus, you can tell it's sort of songy, it doesn't flow, but having the same drum pattern altered in a very minor way helps the whole track flow. It stays cohesive, but it also doesn't get boring.
I remember when we first were making it, we just kind of went with the flow of how we were making the track, so it kind of just sounded a bit awkward, and then you went through and like the week before we put it in, and you structured it like an actual song, and it just made it like 20 times better.
And it was pretty like progressive going through it as well, and like it just kept building up, and then it went to the breakdown, and then it led up to that finale type part of the end of the song.
I mean, there was big evolution, because especially coming from the very first scratch track that we had, we didn't even really time it to bars properly or anything, and the drum loop it didn't line up with the bars properly, and it was really awkward. And at the start, it sounded it sounded cool because it was experimental, but when you're working to a grid and you're trying to be experimental at the same time, it just didn't really have the effect. It wasn't as easy as it was not as easy as I thought it was going to be, but yeah, after it was rearranged, I felt like we were able to build on it so much quicker because we sort of knew what we were doing. We weren't confused by timing or anything, and it was all just starting to sound good.
Making it more song-like also made so you could like fit the guitars in like much easier. There was like an obvious building point where guitars would bring in like a ton of like stress into that section. Even if they were ambient, they were still a big part of that section where the drums would break down and the guitars would come out.
For sure. And while we were recording those guitars, actually one of the criticisms that we got was that we didn't, I think, one of the ones that I remember is that our stereo field wasn't as wide as it could be. And we thought that the bass would cover that just on its own because, bass is pretty wide. But going into, try and remedy this problem that other people heard, we decided to record the guitars. I think it was one of your ideas to record it with a stereo setup when we recorded it.
I think we did MS, a close mic of the amp and a DI signal. So in total it was 4 different signals for each guitar. So we mastered them all separately as stereo guitars and panned them left and right.
Yeah, and it made them huge and ambient. And then on top of that, when we decided to add the reverb and everything, they don't sound just far away, but they also they've got a certain tone to them now because there's so many layers in them. There's clarity, but they're still, they don't sound up in your face, but they still sound powerful.
And the reverb and stuff didn't make it just blur out. It was like a nice amount to suit the mood of everything around it.
Yeah.
We were coming from our side project recording too. That was a long ass day as well. Yeah,
that was a very long day. We were experimenting with stuff in that session too.
Yeah, that was a long night.
I feel like it was pretty good to coming off the back of an already experimental session.
Yeah.
Because we were kind of already in the mindset where we would get in, sit down, get it done. That session actually went really smoothly. I remember that guitar recording session. Initially, because we were recording to the scratch track at that point, and that's like we mentioned earlier, it was a little bit difficult to record guitar bits when the scratch track was so not song-like, and the guitar is such a songy instrument.
It wasn't structured too.
So we went in and recorded single plucks of each note, which we were really lucky to do because afterwards I went in and made a library of each separate note and down.
That was so helpful.
And put them in. Yeah, that definitely made the song more coherent because it wasn't just
for sure.
wacky.
So what was the process? How did you structure the whole song? Because I remember I was away for a whole week, so I wasn't there for when you did structure the song.
I'm glad you bring that up actually, because it lets me move into the choir section. When we were doing that scratch track, we intended to add so much guitar to it afterwards, and we were still in that mindset of making it a really guitar intensive track. But when I was restructuring it, I was thinking about the choir and how nice it actually sounded, and how it sounded as a main element of the track, and how it could be more than just the element. It could the ambient element of the track, but it could also become part of the fundamental, I guess, melody and the whole musical section of it.
Halo-inspired epicness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when I restructured the track, I really tried to get a sort of solid progression going with those, just in a sort of, basic 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 sort of, standard 4/4 pattern. And then I just fucked with the drums a bit until I could get it all sounding coherent. And then I could, stretch it out, make it shorter, add different sections, little break sections. Because, before we forget, also that little glitch sound that we wanted to add in, just to give it that sort of futuristic vibe. Yeah. It was important to get that in there. And it was not easy to get that in there because that, in and of itself, is not a rhythmic or musical thing. It's just sort of a sound.
Yeah, the glitch was a bit weird because it was just a bunch of really quickly activated like MIDI notes where the synth couldn't load it fast enough, so it just makes like this weird sound, and it sounded different every single time we bounced it out.
It was great.
yeah.
So we had
That
like
was really
7
interesting.
different bounces that we
It was
just
awesome.
chucked in to see what they sounded like.
But rearranging the track, let us put that in its own spot and let us highlight it properly. There's a break where it's clear, you can hear that it happens, the glitch happens, and then it breaks into the next portion of the song. I feel like that's part of why restructuring it was so important, because then we're able to add focus to the choirs while simultaneously giving impact to the sections that were meant to have impact, because the human mind unconsciously follows that sort of 4/4 pattern. You can tell when something's building up and when something's meant to end. And back in our scratch track, we didn't have that. But after we restructured it, obviously it became a lot easier.
And originally we were just gonna have the drums loop out at the end because we have the track looping, but we decided instead to have the ambience loop around, like it would fade in, fade out, and if you listen to it on loop, it fades really nicely in and out.
I guess what we could have done.
That's very important for a game soundtrack. Sorry.
Yeah, for instead of just exporting just that one track, we could have actually made sections where it could loop. So if game developers did one, we could have had certain sections for them that's loop for them to use and all that, just to make it easier for them. But
you mean like the different sections, like how we had the large ambient sections.
Well, each section, if you did cut it up,
it would loop.
Would loop, yeah.
That was also a really important thing, because back in our original scope, we were going to make 2 tracks of different sort of intensities, but we decided to combine it as we were turning it into a more of an epic track, just to a big progressive moving track that has that slow build up, and then it sort of drops a bit and it slowly builds up again, and then there's that massive drop off before the massive finale. And it saved us doing 2 tracks, but that one track is still usable in so many different situations.
Yeah, and with the scope getting so big, it definitely meant that as a team we had to work really well together. So we took a role for ourselves. I did a lot of the drum and bass and some of the sound effects and stuff. I know that Ron did a lot of synths as well.
Yeah.
And Dan did a lot of the structuring and melodies and stuff.
Yeah, that was crucial. That was crucial. Having that sort of that team connection there, and having that focus for all of us allowed us to really power through the track. Because I remember we really just sat down and grinded it out. We were so into it at the time that it was just it wasn't really monotonous
choosing the
or
sounds
anything.
together and stuff.
Yeah, it became enjoyable once we sort of had all our ideas together. The vision became clear. The scope was now set in stone, and we could just move on to making it as good as possible.
Yeah, I think it was good that we all had a similar idea of what we wanted our final product to be.
Yeah.
Even though we had slightly different ones, by the end it was just a mass of all our ideas and our availabilities. We were available every single day.
Oh, yeah, it was
we
great.
could just come in whenever and just sit down in a room, ask each other for feedback on hey, you like
It's
that
great.
sound?
I never
And,
felt we were having any major clash of ideas or anything like that. It just sort of all flowed so nicely into a final product.
Yeah, any criticisms were just oh yeah, I understand where you're coming from, because we have a similar idea of what we want. There was nothing screw you, I don't like your idea.
Yeah. I feel like that's important when you're choosing a task, not to just pick, a certain task because maybe you like it or you like the people you're working with, but having everybody on that exact same page makes it so much easier, and it actually makes it so much more enjoyable, not having to have the stress of having to kind of argue for what you want the track to be.
Yeah, the main thing that I was just, because this is a genre that I'm not even familiar with, so
Game music, I think that was new to all of us, wasn't it?
Yeah. Never done soundtracks before.
I don't know, it was just more of a learning process of the track teardowns was a real big help of just getting an overall feel and just learning that this is not your particular type of music that you would make. It's more of just background music, ambience, and all that.
Yeah.
Which was we nailed it, I reckon.
Yeah. I mean, it was a challenge at the start, but it came. I feel like it really embodied what we wanted in the end.
Yeah.
We made 2 scratch tracks just before that. And then we just ended up coming with that.
Yeah, coming from the topic of the track teardowns, they were really useful from like the drum and bass perspective, because I remember there's like the hour-long interview with Mick Gordon, the dude who made the Doom soundtrack.
Yeah.
He went through the process of how he made all his like ambient bass sounds by running it through like 3 different signals and feedbacking running one through distortion and reverb, and then just having one clean signal with like a distorted sine wave running over the top of it.
Yeah.
He just recorded it all back together and made like this weird phasing mess that ended up sounding really similar to what we were able to recreate.
That's really interesting. It's a shame we didn't get to do it with the analog gear, because obviously we don't have access to all that. But I feel like we really tried to capture that vibe with, you know, our mixing processes later on, especially by incorporating, you know, like guitar feedback and stuff like that. Really trying to get that sort of alienish, futuristic sort of almost industrial sound in there too.
But it didn't feel out of place or anything. It just added to like this epic build that we had throughout the whole thing.
Those Mick Gordon interviews really helped kind of solidify the vision as well.
Yeah.
Because he really goes into depth and tells you how and why he makes the sounds and what purpose he thinks that they serve for the player. And you know, when we're thinking about that, when we're thinking, oh, you know, like when we're trying to build tension, what can we do? Oh, add, you know, a bunch of guitar feedback. It's not just pointless noise. It's actually got a purpose as well as being another texture to the sound, like the overall sound.
Yeah, that video really helped us get a clear idea of what we're trying to aim for when we're trying to pick the right sounds and composing the melodies and all that, like going through each of the sections of the track.
You know, speaking of like the mixing, that also was kind of we kind of did it as we went, if I remember correctly. There was one big mixing session at the end, but we sort of mixed our elements as we went, because a lot of it was sound shaping as we went.
Yeah, a lot of it was samples, and we would like mix the samples to what we wanted it to sound like before we even put it in.
We're like, we need a big war drum, but we want it to be huge, so we'd EQ the bottoms up and like, you know, maybe taper in the high end a bit. And so by the time we went to actually mix it, a lot of the levels were already sitting exactly where we wanted to, because we'd already made the sounds we wanted, and it was just a matter of, you know, cleaning them up, like with automation and whatnot.
We wouldn't have to like reverb anything, because we would have already reverbed it before we exported that sample to put it into our actual track.
Exactly.
We did that cool thing where we like reversed the snare into itself.
Those were cool.
And
We
you guys
used that a
did this
lot.
all. Yeah, you guys did this all when I was like not even here. So that was, damn.
No, you did good too. It's okay.
It's all good, yeah. It's all good. No, yeah, those reverse samples were something that added so much impact to the track as well. Without them, it just sort of sounds, it just kind of sounds flat. But when there's a lead into every massive war drum hit, it just helps bring this, like, it emphasizes the movement of the drums that I mentioned earlier. You know,
even before
you
that,
can really hear it, especially coming through like a big speaker. You know, when we presented again. It had so much power behind it. There was so much low end, maybe even too much low end. Who knows? But it was powerful. It was exactly what we wanted.
Yeah, I remember those reverse hits worked really well with like the very beginning of the track. Like there's that little bit of build in, and there's like the silence.
Yeah.
If without that there, it sounded boring as hell.
Yeah. But the silence, it has so much impact when it comes back in.
Yeah. So I remember the cool feedback we got for the final product. That was pretty pretty ego boosting, if I don't say so myself. Do you guys remember what he said, or are you just like pretending you're not knowing?
Oh yeah.
Some retro type. Like
I'm pretty sure balance. He said it's the type of stuff that could be used in a game.
Well, considering our lecturer used to work in the games industry, he said that if he still worked there, he could use our track instantly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That feels pretty good.
He also said that it's something that professionals struggle to make, or something like that. Yeah. The quality of our track.
Yeah, that the game music stays in the game, but doesn't take over everything. Yeah. So that was like, what?
That's awesome.
First game soundtrack, professional quality.
And you mentioned also, sorry, that it was like a good balance between modern and like retro. type
Oh
sounds.
yeah, I do remember that, and that was good because it means that we really met our influences. I mean, we kind of borrowed from the old Doom, we borrowed from the new Doom, we kind of borrowed from a little bit of like retro Halo sort of.
Yeah, you
We
said,
took a
it was
lot.
kind of a like a Metroid kind of thing. I never even thought of Metroid,
Yeah,
but that's like
once he said it,
that's
though, it
like
made
the
sense.
perfect mix in the middle of like alien and like
Yeah.
futuristic and dark.
You know, a lot of
kind
the
thing.
now that you mention it, because after you picture Metroid to the music, it just got me thinking about how when you picture like the image to the music as you're making it, it really helps you make it. And I feel like that was important for the game track. We sort of had an idea of even the game that we wanted to make it for in
Yeah.
our heads before we made it, and it helped us set the sort of mood. We wanted that sort of dark, spooky, but also really extravagant sort of sounding thing. You
Yeah,
know,
like I remember we got the cover art for it. It's not exactly what we imagined.
Oh yeah.
but it works in its own way.
Yeah,
You got to admit, it does
works.
work.
It conveys
Work.
the mood that we wanted.
Yeah.
Just not particularly
I mean,
the vision that we wanted. Because
Probably
we,
just the ambience of the picture and the.
yeah, we wanted it to be kind of like a concept art because most game soundtracks are born from concept art.
Yeah.
And,
It looks more
yeah.
like a stylized art. It reminds me of the type of thing that you'd see, like some sort of. Oh, here we go. My lack of art knowledge, even after doing it all through high school. It seems like the type of thing that it's really. It looks like it fits into a set sort of style of art. It's that kind of like really hyper visualized, you know, black and white, stark sort of thing. It's not necessarily the most lifelike representation of something, but it's almost like it still works in its own way. That was probably really badly explained, but
Yeah, for
hopefully
the people
somebody-
listening, it probably doesn't help that you don't know what this looks like.
Oh, we'll
but
chuck,
it's,
we can chuck it. We can chuck
yeah.
a visual up.
I'll probably chuck it up. But yeah, it's a drawing we got done for us, and it's only in lead, so it's like black, grays, and whites. Like there's nothing crazy colorful about it.
Yeah.
But it's like got all the like hyper detailed little grooves and rocks.
Yeah,
and
especially the
everything.
trees. I was
Yeah.
really impressed with those.
Yeah, that was cool.
So yeah, that's the first podcast of probably many to come.
Yeah.
With the
That's it.
boys, the
We didn't miss
podcast.
anything.
No, I don't think so.
No, not really.
All right.
Unless no, that should be good.
Yeah.
All right.
Laters, boys.
Awesome. Cheers.